She fought the magnetic pull, but the intensity in his storm-gray eyes ignited a forbidden fire she couldn't douse. A yearning bloomed where only control had reigned, threatening everything she'd built. Hello, and a warm welcome, amazing viewers. I'm your storyteller, Morgan, and I hope this message finds you well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you crave stories about soul-stirring romance, the transformative power of unexpected connection, and a love that reshapes entire worlds, you're in the perfect place. This is a tale that lingers long after. To experience every breathtaking moment, watch until the very end. It's so worth it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and let's begin this unforgettable story together. Chapter 1. The city sprawled below Elara Vance's penthouse office, like a circuit board, neat, predictable, humming with contained energy. Up here, in the area of Vance Industries, the world bent to her will. Glass walls reflected the sharp angles of steel furniture, the pristine white surfaces, the single, severe orchid on her desk, a splash of controlled life in a monochrome landscape. Her reflection in the glass was equally precise. A beautiful black woman in her early 40s, sculpted cheekbones beneath smooth dark skin, eyes the color of obsidian, watchful and impenetrable. Her tailored ivory suit was armor. Every movement, the tap of a manicured nail on the glass desk, the precise angle of her crossed legs, radiated absolute control. Order was her oxygen. Down below, beyond the manicured terrace, accessible only by her private elevator, sprawled the neglected grounds of the Eyrie. Acres of potential choked by weeds, overgrown hedges forming tangled walls, flower beds surrendered to wilderness. It was a blind spot in her meticulously curated world, an untamed periphery she acknowledged only as a vague, greenish blur beyond the security feeds. The intercom buzzed, a sterile chirp. "Miss Vance, the new temporary gardener, Mr. Finch, is here for final clearance." Harrison's voice, her head of security, was clipped, efficient. "Send him up," Elara replied, her voice cool, melodic, yet leaving no room for warmth. She didn't turn from the view. Gardeners were transient, interchangeable parts in the estate's machinery, necessary perhaps to maintain the illusion of curb appeal, but utterly beneath her notice. She sensed his presence before she saw him, a subtle shift in the air, the faintest scent of loam and sunlight, cutting through the filtered lemony sterility of her office. Slowly, deliberately, she turned. He stood just inside the threshold, Harrison a watchful shadow behind him. Leo Finch. The name on the file flashed in her mind. Caucasian, late 20s or early 30s. He wasn't what she expected, not burly, not weathered, lean, but with a contained strength in his shoulders and forearms visible beneath the rolled sleeves of a simple, faded blue work shirt. His hair, the color of sun-bleached wheat, was slightly too long, brushing his collar, but it was his eyes that arrested her, rain-washed slate, clear, startlingly direct, yet holding a profound stillness. He met her gaze without flinching, without the usual deference tinged with apprehension she elicited. There was a quiet confidence in his stance, an ease that seemed rooted in the earth. "Not this glass tower." "Miss Vance," Harrison announced unnecessarily. "Mr. Finch." Her acknowledgement was cool, assessing. She didn't offer a hand. "Your references are adequate. The grounds are extensive and neglected. You have 3 months. Prioritize the perimeter visibility for security. Minimal disruption." A flicker almost imperceptible in those slate-gray eyes. Not annoyance, perhaps. Amusement. "Neglected implies something was once cared for, Miss Vance," he said, his voice low, calm, carrying a faint, unplaceable accent that softened the edges of his words. "From what I saw walking in, it feels more intentionally forgotten." The observation, delivered so mildly, felt like a tiny stone dropped into the still pond of her control. It rippled. "Presumptuous. Semantics, Mr. Finch. The point is restoration to a functional state, not landscaping." She gestured dismissively towards the terrace doors. "Harrison will show you the access points and the tool shed. Report any issues directly to him. You are not to enter the main house without explicit permission." "Understood." He inclined his head, a gesture that managed to be respectful without being subservient. His gaze lingered on her face for a heartbeat longer than strictly necessary, a silent, unnerving appraisal that made the fine hairs on her nape prickle. Then he turned, following Harrison out, leaving behind that unsettling trace of earth and quiet. Annoying, she thought, forcing her attention back to the quarterly reports glowing on her screen. Too observant, too still. The silence he carried felt heavier than Harrison's deferential quiet. It demanded space. The next days became an exercise in peripheral awareness. Elara's routine was clockwork, pre-dawn arrival, immersive hours of strategy and negotiation, a late lunch taken alone at her desk, more meetings conducted via holographic projection that made distant executives seem like ghosts in her pristine space. Yet, her gaze kept straying to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the South Terrace and the wilderness beyond. Leo Finch was a constant, quiet punctuation mark in the view. He worked with a focused economy of movement. She saw him clearing thickets of bramble, the muscles in his back shifting beneath sweat-damp cotton. She watched him wrestle ancient, overgrown roots from the stubborn earth, the effort visible in the corded tendons of his neck. Sunlight, fracturing through the high glass, would catch the dust motes swirling around him like golden pollen, haloing his bent form. He moved with a connection to the ground he worked on, a tactile understanding that felt alien in her world of touchscreens and virtual interfaces. One afternoon, needing a rare break from a particularly thorny acquisition proposal, Elara stepped onto the South Terrace. The air outside was thick and warm, humming with insects and the distant drone of the city, a stark contrast to the chilled silence inside. She walked towards the edge, the smooth stone warm beneath her thin-soled shoes, intending to survey the city skyline, to reassert perspective. A flash of movement caught her eye below. Leo was near the dilapidated greenhouse, its glass panes grimy and cracked. He was carefully extracting a cluster of vibrant purple flowers, violets, she thought distantly, from a choked patch of weeds. He handled the fragile stems with surprising tenderness, his large dirt-streaked hands incongruously gentle. Rescuing survivors, the words were out before she could filter them, her tone cooler than intended, covering the unexpected flicker of interest. He straightened, turning to look up at her. He shielded his eyes against the sun, his expression unreadable. "More like acknowledging the stubborn," he replied, his voice carrying easily in the quiet, held that same calm cadence. "They've been clinging on here for years, waiting for someone to notice they weren't weeds." He held up the small cluster. The purple was startlingly vivid against the grime of his hand. "Beauty persists, Miss Vance, even when it's inconveniently placed." Was that a barb? Directed at the flowers, or her? Her spine stiffened. "Beauty is subjective, Mr. Finch, and often requires significant resources to maintain its position." She gestured vaguely towards the ordered cityscape. "Control is preferable to persistence." He smiled then, a slow, slight curve of his lips that crinkled the corners of his eyes. It transformed his face, revealing a warmth she hadn't anticipated. "Control keeps things neat, I'll grant you that," he said, his gaze sweeping pointedly over the neglected grounds before returning to her. "But persistence? Persistence changes things, sometimes cracks the concrete." He carefully placed the violets into a bucket of water beside him. These didn't ask permission, they just grew. The simplicity of the statement, the quiet challenge in it, unsettled her. It felt like he was talking about something else entirely. "See that your persistence remains focused on the assigned tasks, Mr. Finch," she said crisply, turning on her heel. "Not philosophical musings." His low chuckle followed her back into the sterile chill of her office. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Vance." The amusement in his voice lingered, an unwelcome vibration in the air she breathed. That night, the dream came, not of fire, but of earth. Cool, dark, fragrant earth. She was sinking into it, not drowning, but embraced, rooted. Above, sunlight filtered through green leaves, dappling the form of a man silhouetted against the light. She couldn't see his face, only sensed his presence, calm and watchful. She reached up, fingers straining towards the light, towards him, and woke with a start, her heart pounding against her ribs, the scent of turned soil and rain, somehow vivid in her sterile bedroom. The sheets felt confining. The digital clock's glow was harsh. Nonsense. Stress. She banished the image, the feeling, the lingering phantom scent, but the prickle of awareness, that unsettling sense of being observed even in solitude, remained. The following week, the tension became a tangible thing, a low-frequency hum beneath the surface of her meticulously ordered days. She found herself scheduling her terrace breaks when she knew he'd likely be working nearby. She'd stand, a cool glass of mineral water in hand, pretending to survey the distant horizon while tracking his movements in her peripheral vision, the flex of his arm as he swung an axe to clear deadwood, the way sweat darkened the fabric between his shoulder blades, the focused intensity on his face as he pruned a stubborn vine. He rarely spoke unless she initiated, but his silence wasn't empty. It felt expectant, charged. One particularly humid afternoon, she found him wrestling with an ancient rusted irrigation valve near the terrace steps. He was shirtless, his torso lean and muscled, tanned golden brown, glistening with sweat. The sight was a physical jolt, unexpected and visceral. Heat, unrelated to the sun, flooded her cheeks. She stopped, frozen for a moment, the condensation from her glass cold against her palm. He sensed her, looking up. Those slate-gray eyes met hers, holding her gaze without apology. A droplet of sweat traced a path down the strong column of his throat. "Problem with the antique plumbing," he said, his voice slightly roughened by effort. He didn't cover up. The air between them thickened, heavy with the scent of hot metal, damp earth,
and male exertion. Elara forced her voice to remain level, detached. Is it impeding progress? Progress, such a sterile word for the raw physicality before her. He gave the wrench another hard turn. Metal groaned. Everything down here is an impediment to progress, Miss Vance, he replied, a wry edge to his words. He finally broke eye contact to focus on the stubborn valve. But I find brute force is rarely the answer. Patience, understanding the resistance. He glanced back up, a ghost of that challenging smile touching his lips. Sometimes you have to coax things open. Her breath hitched. Was he talking about the valve, the grounds, her? The double entendre hung in the humid air. Deliberate or not, she felt exposed, flustered in a way boardroom adversaries never managed. Just ensure it functions, Mr. Finch, she snapped, the sharpness a defense against the unsettling warmth coiling low in her belly. She retreated into the sanctuary of her office, the glass doors sliding shut behind her with a soft hiss, a barrier against the disquieting heat, both outside and within. The dream of Earth returned, stronger, more insistent. This time, strong hands pulled her deeper into the cool darkness, not to bury her, but to anchor her. She woke gasping, not with fear, but with a profound sense of longing that left her trembling and hollow. This is unacceptable. Dangerous. She resolved to ignore him completely, to have Harrison relay any necessary instructions, to focus solely on the upcoming merger, a complex, high-stakes negotiation demanding all her formidable concentration. Leo Finch was a temporary inconvenience, a ripple. She would not let him become a wave. The night of the fire began like any other. The city lights glittered below, a counterpoint to the deep indigo sky. Elara worked late, the only illumination in the vast penthouse apartment coming from the holographic displays floating above her desk and the soft glow of the city through the panoramic windows. The silence was deep, broken only by the faint hum of electronics and the rhythmic tap of her stylus. The merger documents demanded ruthless focus, a welcome distraction from the unsettling undercurrents of the past days. She'd barely registered Leo's departure hours earlier, the grounds swallowed by twilight. The first sign was subtle, a faint acrid tang cutting through the filtered air. She frowned, sniffing, dismissing it as the building's ventilation system cycling oddly. Then, a soft pop, like a bulb blowing, from the direction of her private study annex, a smaller room off the main living space housing rare first editions and sensitive physical files. A flicker of orange light danced under the closed door. Alarm, cold and sharp, pierced her concentration. She stood, moving swiftly towards the annex. The smell intensified, the unmistakable reek of burning plastic and paper. She pushed the door open. Chaos. Flames, bright and hungry, licked up the far wall where an overloaded antique power strip had sparked, igniting a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. Thick, choking smoke billowed upwards, already obscuring the ceiling. Heat radiated outwards, a physical wall that made her stagger back, coughing violently. Panic, a feral beast she'd caged for decades, tore free. Fire. Her mind screamed the obvious, useless fact. Extinguisher. But the small unit was mounted beside the burning bookshelf, already engulfed. Alarm! She stumbled back into the main living area, eyes streaming, throat burning. The sleek control panel by the elevator. She lunged for it, fingers fumbling on the smooth surface, smoke stinging her eyes, making her vision blur. Where was the emergency button? Her meticulously ordered world was dissolving into a nightmare of heat, noise, and terror. The crackle of the fire intensified, a malevolent roar filling the apartment. Smoke thickened, reducing visibility to gray, swirling tendrils. Disoriented, coughing so hard her ribs ached, she stumbled away from the panel, colliding painfully with the edge of her glass coffee table. She went down, gasping, the taste of ash thick on her tongue. Fear, pure and primal, consumed her. The exit, the private elevator, seemed miles away through the choking gloom. She tried to crawl, the polished floor hot beneath her palms. The roaring grew louder, the heat unbearable. This is it. The thought was terrifyingly calm amidst the chaos. Consumed by the chaos I always controlled. Through stinging tears and roiling smoke, a shape coalesced. Not the expected bulky form of building security. Leaner, faster, moving with a terrifying single-minded purpose towards the inferno. Towards her. He dropped to his knees beside her, a damp rag pressed over his own nose and mouth. His eyes, those impossible, rain-gray eyes wide and fierce above it. Soot streaked his face, his hair plastered dark to his forehead. Leo. Recognition was a dizzying shockwave. What was he doing here? How? He didn't speak. His gaze locked onto hers, a silent command cutting through her terror. Look at me. Focus. Then his hands were on her. One arm slid beneath her shoulders, the other hooked under her knees. He lifted her effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing. The sheer shocking strength of it, the solidity of him against her back as he pulled her upright, and then cradled her against his chest, was an anchor in the dissolving world. The heat was a physical assault. Flames licked hungrily at the doorway to the annex. Leo didn't hesitate. He turned his body, shielding her with his back, and plunged through the smoke-filled living area towards the terrace doors. She buried her face against his shoulder, the rough cotton of his shirt scratchy against her cheek, the scent of earth and sweat and smoke, an intoxicating, terrifying blend. She felt the powerful surge of his muscles as he moved, heard his ragged breaths beneath the roar of the fire, felt the jarring impact as he kicked open the terrace doors, glass shattering outwards. Cool night air hit them like a physical blow, sweet and life-giving after the suffocating heat. He carried her several strides onto the wide terrace, away from the billowing smoke pouring from the shattered doors, and gently lowered her onto the dew-damp flagstones. She collapsed, gasping, sucking in great lungfuls of clean air, her body trembling violently. He crouched before her for a split second, his soot-streaked face close, those intense eyes scanning her face, checking for injury. The raw concern in them, the sheer physicality of his presence so close, was overwhelming. She reached out a trembling hand, instinctively, not knowing what she sought. Reassurance, connection, an anchor in the aftershock.
His hand closed over hers, not gently, but firmly, grounding her. His skin was surprisingly cool against her burning palm, calloused, strong. The contact sent a jolt through her, different from the terror, electric and profound. His eyes held hers, a silent question, a shared understanding of the precipice they'd just skirted. Then, distant sirens wailed, cutting through the night. The sound seemed to break the spell. He released her hand abruptly, the loss of contact feeling like a physical wound. His gaze flickered towards the approaching lights, then back to her face. There was no time for words, only that intense, fleeting look, a look that held the chaos of the fire and an unexpected, piercing tenderness. He pushed himself up. "Security's coming," he rasped, his voice rough from smoke. He took a step back, then another, towards the terrace steps leading down to the gardens, to the servants' quarters. "You're safe." Before she could form a coherent thought, a protest, a question, he was gone, melting into the deep shadows of the garden as swiftly and silently as he had appeared, vanished, like a phantom conjured by the flames. Elara remained on the cold stone, clutching the hand he had held. The heat from the fire still radiated from the open doorway, but it was nothing compared to the burn where his skin had touched hers. Soot smudged her ivory suit, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum solo of residual terror and something else entirely. She stared into the darkness where he'd disappeared, the imprint of his touch branding her skin, his fierce, protective presence seared into her mind. The wail of sirens grew deafening, flashing red and blue lights painted the terrace walls. Harrison burst onto the scene, face pale with shock, shouting orders into his comm. Paramedics approached, voices urgent, hands reaching for her. But Elara Vance, the woman who commanded empires, who bent reality to her will, didn't move. She sat amidst the chaos, rescued yet utterly undone, staring into the void where the gardener had vanished. The meticulously ordered world of the Eyrie was breached, and the fire that nearly consumed her had ignited something else entirely, a terrifying forbidden spark deep within the ashes of her control. The scent of smoke and damp earth clung to her, a haunting reminder. The imprint on her wrist felt hotter than any flame. Control had shattered, and in the wreckage, an unexpected, devastating awareness bloomed, as persistent and inconvenient as violets in the weeds. Chapter 2. The acrid ghost of smoke lingered in the Eyrie long after the physical damage was repaired. Scaffolding had risen and fallen in Elara's private study annex, replacing charred timbers and melted wiring with sleek, identical materials. The scorched scent had been scrubbed, filtered, and air-sealed away. Yet, for Elara Vance, seated rigidly at her resurrected glass desk, the phantom tang clung stubbornly to the back of her throat, a constant, unwelcome reminder. The repaired space felt sterile in a new way, not just devoid of life, but haunted by the memory of its own dissolution. The cityscape view, once a symbol of her dominion, now felt distant and vaguely threatening. Control, her lifelong bedrock, felt like sand shifting beneath her feet. The fire had breached her sanctuary, but it was the rescue that had truly shattered her defenses. The memory replayed in brutal sensory loops, the terrifying disorientation, the crushing heat, the primal fear, and then him, the shocking strength of Leo's arms lifting her like she was weightless, the solid wall of his chest shielding her back as he charged through hell, the startling coolness of his hand gripping hers on the dew-slick terrace, the fierce clarity of his eyes above the soot-stained rag, eyes that had held terror, yes, but also a ferocious, protective determination aimed solely at her. And then, The vanishing. She'd given clipped statements to the fire investigators, to Harrison, to the paramedics. Electrical fault. Trapped briefly. Gardner assisted. He left before I could properly thank him. The words felt hollow, inadequate containers for the seismic shift within her. Harrison, radiating guilt and heightened vigilance, had questioned Leo discreetly. The gardener's account had been simple, plausible, heard the commotion, saw smoke from his quarters window, ran up the service stairs, acted on instinct. He'd downplayed his role, Harrison reported. Just did what anyone would, sir. The humility felt like another layer of mystery. Elara tried to re-enter the old rhythm. She pored over merger documents, conducted virtual board meetings with steely precision, dictated memos in her cool, melodic voice. But her focus frayed like cheap thread. Her gaze inevitably drifted to the windows. The south terrace, scene of her humiliation and rescue, became a magnetic north for her restless attention. And there he was, Leo Finch, back at work, amidst the burgeoning chaos of the neglected grounds, as if the inferno and its aftermath were merely an inconvenient rain shower. He moved with the same quiet, focused energy, clearing another swath of bramble, wrestling ancient roots from the reluctant earth. Sunlight caught the sweat on his temple, the flecks of muscle beneath his worn work shirt. He seemed unchanged, untouched by the fire that had burned a hole in her world. The sheer normalcy of it was infuriating and intoxicating. A forbidden heat, entirely separate from the remembered flames, began to simmer low in her belly. It sparked when she caught the scent of turned earth, drifting through the slightly ajar terrace doors, a scent now irrevocably tangled with the memory of his skin, his sweat, the smoke. It flared when she saw the surprising delicacy with which he handled a fragile sapling, his large, capable hands gentle against its tender stem. It became a constant, low thrum, when his gaze, seemingly by chance, would lift and meet hers through the glass, a silent, electric connection that lasted a heartbeat too long before he respectfully looked away. Shame warred with a yearning so intense it frightened her. He is staff, he is white, he is unknown, and I am losing my mind. She avoided the terrace. For days, she had Harrison relay instructions about prioritizing the perimeter clearance. She buried herself in the complexities of the merger, a high-stakes chess game demanding ruthlessness. Yet the garden called, not visually, but olfactorily. The scent of freshly cut grass, of damp soil after a brief shower, of something sweet and floral blooming near the greenhouse, insinuated itself past the air filters. It was life, raw and persistent, pushing against the sterile boundaries of her existence. And it was his doing. One afternoon, driven by a restlessness she couldn't name, Elara found herself walking the length of the restored annex. The new bookshelves stood empty, waiting for replacements. The air hummed with the silence of near completion. Needing space, needing air that didn't taste of her own confinement, she pushed open the door to the south terrace. The change hit her immediately. Where there had been a choked tangle of weeds and dead brush near the terrace steps, a patch of dark, rich earth now lay exposed. And within it, Leo was planting. Not the orderly rows she might have expected, but a seemingly haphazard cluster of vibrant green shoots and small budding plants. He knelt in the dirt, his back to her, completely absorbed. The sun warmed the nape of his neck, where his hair was slightly too long. The quiet concentration radiating from him was palpable. She stood for a moment, observing. The sheer physicality of him, the connection to the earth, was mesmerizing. Then, a faint sweet fragrance caught her attention. Jasmine. He'd planted jasmine vines at the base of the terrace wall. Tiny white buds promised future perfume, introducing fragrance to the fortress, Mr. Finch. The words emerged, cooler than she intended, a defense against the sudden warmth spreading through her chest. He finished tamping soil around a small plant before slowly turning. He looked up, shielding his eyes. Sweat beaded on his forehead, streaked with a smudge of dirt. Even fortresses need air, Miss Vance, he replied, his voice calm, that faint accent softening the edges. And jasmine smells sweeter at night, thought it might soften the edges. His gaze swept briefly over the stark lines of the terrace, then back to her face. Unless you prefer the scent of smoke and disinfectant. The casual reference to the fire, the subtle challenge in his tone, sent a jolt through her. It wasn't disrespectful, but it wasn't deferential either. It felt intimate, like he was acknowledging the shared trauma they hadn't spoken of. I prefer control, Mr. Finch, she stated, crossing her arms. Predictability. Jasmine is unpredictable. It grows where it wills. He picked up a trowel, running a thumb along its edge. Everything grows where it wills, given half a chance, he said, looking not at her, but at the newly turned earth. Control is just pruning back the bits you don't want to see, doesn't stop the roots. He finally met her eyes again, a flicker of something unreadable in the gray depths.
Sometimes, the things you prune hardest come back strongest. Seen it with roses, seen it with other things. Her attempts to suppress the memory of the fire, or the unsettling, persistent heat his presence ignited. He knows, he feels it too. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating. Just ensure your horticultural philosophy doesn't impede security sightlines. She deflected, her voice tighter than she wanted. He gave a low chuckle, the sound warm and unexpected. Wouldn't dream of impeding your sightlines, Miss Vance. He held her gaze for a deliberate moment, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Though I can't speak for the Jasmine. Elara retreated, her cheeks inexplicably warm. The brief exchange felt like a skirmish she hadn't intended to fight, and hadn't won. His words echoed. Grows where it wills, pruning back the bits you don't want to see. She spent the rest of the afternoon staring at spreadsheets, seeing not numbers but rain-grey eyes and sun-bleached hair, smelling not data but damp earth and the phantom promise of Jasmine. The garden began its silent conquest. Leo worked with relentless, quiet energy. Barren patches surrendered to explosions of color, crimson poppies nodding on slender stems, vibrant blue cornflowers, drifts of delicate white daisies. He coaxed life from the skeletal remains of climbing roses against the old garden walls, their thorny canes greening, promising future blooms. Wild, fragrant herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender, appeared near the terrace, their scents carried on the breeze. The neglected grounds were transforming from a wild periphery into a vibrant living tapestry. It was messy, untamed, and breathtakingly alive. The Eyrie, once a monument to cold order, was softening at the edges, mirroring the insistent thaw within Elara. She found herself drawn to the windows more frequently. Her terrace breaks became rituals. She'd stand, a silent observer, watching him work. The tension between them was a living thing, humming in the spaces between glances, in the careful distance he maintained, in the way his body seemed subtly attuned to her presence, even when he didn't look up. The banter became a dangerous dance. One morning, she found him wrestling with a particularly stubborn vine, threatening to engulf a fragile-looking sapling he'd recently planted. He was muttering under his breath, a low, frustrated sound. "Losing an argument with the foliage, Mr. Finch?" she inquired, leaning against the cool stone railing. He glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a fresh smear of dirt. "More of a negotiation, Miss Vance. This old wisteria thinks it owns the place, doesn't appreciate newcomers." He gave the thick vine a firm, but not harsh tug. "Needs to learn boundaries." "Boundaries are essential," she agreed, her tone neutral. "Though some things resist containment." She let her gaze drift pointedly over the wild profusion of flowers blooming beyond his designated patch. "Your own handiwork seems rather unrestrained." It lit his eyes, crinkling the corners, transforming him entirely. "Guilty as charged," he admitted, the warmth in his voice disarming. "Got a soft spot for the stubborn ones, the ones that bloom where they're planted, even when the soil's poor and the shade's deep." He looked back at her, the smile softening, but the intensity in his gaze deepening. "There's a kind of courage in that, don't you think? Refusing to be pruned out of existence." The double meaning was unmistakable now. He wasn't just talking about flowers. He was talking about the heat between them, the inconvenient persistence of her awareness, perhaps even her own survival of the fire. Courage. The word resonated, unsettlingly. She felt exposed, seen in a way she hadn't been in decades. "Courage can be reckless, Mr. Finch," she countered, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "Survival often requires calculated retreat." "Sometimes," he conceded, turning back to the wisteria, his voice dropping slightly. "But sometimes, survival looks a lot like pushing through the damn concrete." He applied pressure to the vine again, and this time it yielded slightly. "Ah, progress. Told you it was a negotiation." Elara walked away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Pushing through the damn concrete." The phrase echoed the image from her dream, the violets cracking the pavement. Was she the concrete, or was she the thing trying to push through? The dreams intensified, no longer just earth, but earth and fire intertwined. Strong hands pulling her not just into cool darkness, but through flames, the heat terrifying yet exhilarating, because he was there, his presence a shield. She'd wake tangled in sweat-damp sheets, the phantom scent of smoke and Leo's earthy sweat clinging to her, the ache between her thighs a persistent, humiliating throb. The merger negotiations grew fraught. She made an uncharacteristically sharp retort to a key investor, a lapse that cost her leverage. Control was slipping, grain by grain. The breaking point came on an afternoon heavy with the promise of rain. The air was thick, oppressive, pressing down on the city. Elara had just concluded a particularly draining conference call, the tensions of the merger mirroring the building atmospheric pressure. Needing escape, she stepped onto the terrace. Leo was near the now thriving jasmine vines, securing them to a trellis he'd built against the wall. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold and startling against her skin. He looked up as the rain intensified, quickly becoming a downpour. The terrace offered minimal cover, just a shallow overhang from the roof. Elara moved instinctively towards it, seeking shelter. Leo, caught further out, jogged the few steps to join her under the narrow ledge. They stood close, too close, the drumming rain on the stone terrace loud enough to drown out the city, creating a sudden intimate pocket of isolation. Water plastered his hair to his forehead, dripped from his chin onto his already damp shirt. The scent of him, rain, wet earth, warm skin, and the faint sweet trace of jasmine, was overwhelming. Elara could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cooling air. Her own ivory blouse was damp, clinging. The space between them vibrated with unspoken tension, thick and sweet and terrifying. He turned his head slightly to look at her. Raindrops clung to his eyelashes. His gaze traveled over her face, down to where the damp fabric of her blouse hinted at the curve of her breast, then back up, meeting her eyes. The intensity in his grey eyes was no longer just calm observation. It was a deep, smoldering hunger that mirrored the ache within her. It stripped her bare. "Quite the downpour," he murmured, his voice roughened by the rain, or perhaps by something else. His gaze didn't waver. "Unexpected," she managed, her own voice breathless, betraying her. She was acutely aware of every point where their bodies almost touched, her arm inches from his, the heat of his thigh near hers. The memory of his hands on her, lifting her from the fire, flashed with searing clarity. She wanted those hands on her now, not to save her, but to consume her. "Some things build," he said softly, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips. "Pressure, heat, until they have to break." He shifted slightly, his knuckles brushing against the back of her hand where it rested against the cold stone wall. The contact was electric. A jolt shot through her, shattering the last fragile vestiges of her resolve. It wasn't just a touch, it was an answer, a question, a surrender. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand, just slightly, so her palm rested against his knuckles. The rough skin, the solid bone beneath, the shocking intimacy of skin on skin in the rain-lashed silence. Her breath hitched audibly. He went utterly still, his gaze locked onto their touching hands, then lifted slowly, searchingly to her face. The hunger in his eyes was now a wildfire, unchecked. The question was there, blazingly clear. Is this permission? Elara couldn't speak. Words were dust. Her carefully constructed world, her rules, her control, they lay in ruins at her feet, washed away by the rain and the devastating simplicity of his touch. The fire had been the catalyst, but this slow burn in the garden, this relentless push of life against her concrete walls, this was the true inferno. And staring into the storm-grey depths of his eyes, feeling the answering conflagration in her own veins, Elara Vance knew, with terrifying certainty, that she was already ablaze. Her resolve didn't just crack, it vaporized. The silent tension snapped, replaced by a roaring need that demanded more than glances, more than words, more than the fleeting brush of knuckles in the rain. The downpour hammered down, a curtain separating them from the world, turning the terrace into a watery cocoon. The scent of wet stone, drenched earth, and blooming jasmine mingled with the ozone tang of the storm and the intoxicating warmth of his nearness. Time seemed to suspend. The drumming rain was the only sound, a frantic heartbeat echoing the pulse, thundering in her own ears. His knuckles were still pressed against her palm, a point of searing contact that radiated heat up her arm, pooling low in her belly, spreading like liquid fire. He didn't move. He held perfectly still, his gaze locked on hers, the intensity in his grey eyes shifting from a question to a stunned, waiting certainty. He felt it too, the shattering, the surrender, the raw vulnerability in her eyes, usually so fiercely guarded, was laid bare. He saw the fear, yes, the terror of this freefall, but beneath it, blazing brighter, was the hunger, the desperate, answering need. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Elara turned her hand fully. Her fingers, cool from the rain, slid over his knuckles, tracing the ridges and calluses earned from taming her wilderness. The gesture was deliberate, irrevocable. It wasn't just acceptance, it was an invitation, a plea. A low sound escaped him, almost a groan, swallowed by the rain. His hand shifted beneath hers, turning, his palm meeting hers, skin to skin. The contact was seismic. His hand was larger, rougher, infinitely strong, yet his touch was astonishingly gentle as his fingers interlaced with hers. The simple act of threading their fingers together felt more intimate than any kiss could have been. It was a joining, a silent vow. Her breath shuddered out. She leaned into the connection, her body swaying slightly towards him, drawn by an invisible force stronger than gravity. The scant inches separating them vanished. The heat of his chest brushed against the damp silk of her blouse. Rain dripped from his hair onto her forehead, tracing a cold path down her temple, but she barely felt it. All she felt was the solid warmth of him, the hard muscle beneath his wet shirt, the pounding of his heart against her own frantic rhythm where their bodies touched. His free hand lifted, hesitant, then settled against the curve of her jaw. His thumb brushed away a raindrop, the pad rough yet infinitely tender against her skin. His touch traced the line of her cheekbone, a slow, reverent exploration that made her tremble. His eyes drank her in, the parted lips, the wide, dark eyes reflecting the stormy light, the rapid pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. Elara! Her name on his lips was a rasp, a benediction, a sound torn from deep within him. It wasn't a question anymore. She couldn't answer with words. Her free hand lifted, trembling, and came to rest against his chest. She felt the powerful thud of his heart beneath her palm, a wild counterpoint to the rain. She tilted her face up, an offering, a surrender. He needed no further invitation. His head bent, his gaze fixed on her lips. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the drumming rain, to the mingled scent of storm and skin and jasmine. His lips touched hers. It wasn't a collision, but a convergence. Soft, at first, tentative, a brush of warmth against coolness, a testing of the waters after the long drought. Then, as her lips parted on a sigh, yielding, it deepened. His mouth moved over hers with a hunger that mirrored her own, yet tempered with a startling sweetness. It was a kiss that spoke of fire and earth, of chaos and sanctuary, of long restraint finally unleashed. His hand slid from her jaw into her hair, cradling her head, his fingers tangling in the damp strands. Her hand fisted in the wet fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself as the ground seemed to fall away. The rain lashed down, soaking them, but they were oblivious. The kiss was their world. It was the culmination of weeks of stolen glances, charged silences, and unspoken yearning. It was the answer to the fire's terror, the garden's relentless life, the slow erosion of her walls. It was recognition, profound and absolute. The taste of rain on his lips, the faint salt of sweat, the underlying warmth that was uniquely him. It flooded her senses, drowning thought, leaving only raw, overwhelming sensation. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her, lifting her slightly off her feet, crushing her against the solid wall of his body. She melted into him, her arms sliding around his neck, surrendering completely to the heat, the strength, the devastating rightness of it. The kiss deepened further, becoming a desperate exploration, a claiming. Tongues tangled, breaths mingled, ragged and hot against rain-cooled skin. The storm raged around them, but within their embrace was a fierce, consuming calm. Time lost meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads resting together, the world rushed back in. The roar of the rain, the chill of their soaked clothes, the vibrant green scent of the garden. But it was a different world. The concrete had cracked. The vines had pushed through. The fire within had found its kindred spark. Leo's eyes, when she dared to look into them, were dark, stormy pools reflecting the same awe, the same terrifying joy she felt. His thumb traced her swollen lower lip, a silent echo of the kiss. Rain streamed down his face, plastering his hair dark against his skull, but he was smiling, a slow, dazed, utterly beautiful smile that transformed him. Elara, he breathed again, her name a wonder on his lips. She couldn't speak, her throat was too tight. She simply pressed closer, burying her face against the warm, wet skin of his neck, breathing him in. Earth, rain, sweat, Leo. The forbidden desire had ignited, consuming her carefully constructed life. The slow burn was over, the true fire had just begun, and as she stood locked in his arms on the rain-swept terrace, the vibrant, untamed garden bearing witness, Elara Vance knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The controlled CEO was gone. In her place stood a woman ablaze, reshaped by the touch of the gardener who had saved her from one inferno only to plunge her headlong into another, far more dangerous and infinitely more beautiful. The all-consuming bond had snapped into place, silent, profound, and utterly irreversible. The transformation was complete.
Chapter 3. The rain didn't stop. It hammered down, a relentless percussion on the stone terrace, soaking them to the bone, but Elara barely registered the chill. The fire that roared now was entirely internal, a conflagration ignited by Leo's kiss, fed by the desperate press of his body against hers, the rough silk of his wet shirt beneath her clutching fingers, the intoxicating taste of rain and him on her lips. The world had shrunk to the small pocket of shelter under the overhang, to the storm-grey eyes gazing into hers with a mixture of awe and dawning, consuming hunger. He pulled back slightly, just enough to see her face, his breath coming in ragged bursts that mingled with hers in the cool, damp air. Rainwater streamed down his temples, tracing paths through the dirt smudged on his jaw. His hand, still tangled in her hair, trembled almost imperceptibly. Elara, he breathed again, her name a rough caress, a question, a prayer. Speech was impossible. Her throat was tight, her mind a white noise of sensation. She answered by surging forward, capturing his lips once more, a wordless plea for more, for everything. The kiss this time was less tentative, a deeper exploration, a claiming. His arms tightened around her, lifting her slightly, crushing her against the hard planes of his chest and abdomen. She wrapped her legs instinctively around his waist, the sheer strength in him, the solidity, a dizzying anchor in the storm of her own desire. The damp fabric of their clothes was a negligible barrier. She could feel the heat of his skin radiating through, the powerful muscles bunching beneath her touch as he held her. He broke the kiss, pressing his forehead hard against hers, his eyes squeezed shut, as if grappling with some immense force. Inside, he rasped against her lips, the word thick with need. Now, he didn't wait for assent. Carrying her as easily as he had that night in the fire, he turned, shielding her body instinctively from the worst of the downpour with his own, and strode towards the terrace doors she'd left ajar. He kicked them wider, the glass panes rattling, and plunged into the cool, dry silence of the restored annex. The contrast was jarring. The sterile, lemony scent of new materials and filtered air replaced the wild perfume of rain and jasmine. The only sound was the drumming downpour outside, and their own harsh breathing echoing in the empty space. He set her down gently on her feet, near the center of the room, the polished floor cool beneath her bare soles. Water pooled around them, darkening the pale stone. The harsh overhead lights, activated by motion, glared down, illuminating the stark reality of their soaked clothes, their flushed faces, the raw hunger in their eyes. For a heartbeat they simply stared at each other, breathing hard, the air crackling with the tension of what had begun and what was about to explode. The controlled CEO and the quiet gardener stood amidst the sterile perfection of her rebuilt sanctuary, drenched, disheveled, and utterly undone by desire. The absurdity, the sheer audacity of it, struck Elara, but it was swept away by a wave of pure, desperate need. He reached for her, his hand sliding up her rain-chilled arm, leaving a trail of fire. His touch traced the curve of her shoulder, the sensitive dip of her collarbone, coming to rest against the rapid pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. His thumb brushed the spot, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. His gaze, dark and fathomless, held hers. No words, none were needed. The silent question, the promise, the demand was there, blazing in the storm-gray depths. She answered by reaching for the buttons of his soaked work shirt. Her fingers, usually so deft and precise, fumbled against the wet fabric. He didn't move, just watched her, his breath catching as her knuckles brushed against the hard plane of his chest beneath. The first button gave way, then the second, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin, a smattering of sun-bleached hair. A low sound, almost a growl, rumbled in his chest. "Let me," he murmured, his voice gravelly. His hands covered hers, stilling their trembling. He didn't push them away, he guided them, helping her undo the stubborn buttons, his gaze never leaving her face. The intimacy of the act, the shared focus, was almost more potent than the kiss. As the shirt fell open, she pushed it off his shoulders, letting it drop to the wet floor with a sodden slap. His torso was leanly muscled, sculpted by physical labor, tanned golden, damp with rain and sweat. She traced the lines of his ribs, the hard planes of his abdomen, her touch tentative, reverent. He shuddered under her exploration, his eyes drifting closed for a moment. "This," he said, his voice thick, "is impractical for gardening." The ghost of a smile touched his lips, a flicker of their old banter in the midst of the maelstrom. A breathless, unexpected laugh escaped her. "Not my usual attire for mergers either," she managed, the mundane words absurdly grounding. He peeled the clinging silk upwards, over her head, dropping it carelessly beside his shirt. The cool air hit her bare skin, raising goosebumps, but his gaze, hot and possessive, swept over her, warming her instantly. His large, calloused hands spanned her waist, his thumbs brushing the sensitive skin just below her ribs. He bent his head, his lips finding the curve of her shoulder, trailing feather-light kisses along her collarbone, his breath hot against her damp skin. Every touch was an electric current, erasing thought, erasing fear, erasing everything but the overwhelming reality of him. The rest of their clothes became a frantic mutual shedding, a tangle of wet fabric and desperate hands. There was no hesitation, no artifice. They came together on the cool stone floor of the annex, not on some plush surface, but on the hard, unyielding ground of her reconstructed world. It felt fitting, raw, real. His body covered hers, a solid weight, a welcome anchor. The first touch of skin on skin, everywhere, was a revelation. The heat of him, the surprising smoothness of his skin over hard muscle, the contrasting roughness of his hands as they roamed her body. It was sensory overload of the most exquisite kind. His mouth found hers again, a deep, claiming kiss that stole her breath, then trailed lower, blazing a path down her throat, over the swell of her breast, his tongue swirling, teasing a peak to a hardened point. She arched into his touch, gasping, her fingers tangling in his damp hair, holding him closer.
Lao, she moaned, the name torn from her, a sound of pure, desperate need she didn't recognize as her own. He lifted his head, his eyes burning into hers. Look at me, he commanded, his voice rough with desire. Look at me, Elara. She forced her eyes open, meeting his stormy gaze. In that shared look, there was no gardener, no CEO. There was only man and woman, stripped bare of pretense, consumed by a need that had simmered and finally boiled over. He entered her slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on hers, watching every flicker of sensation cross her face. The initial stretch, the overwhelming fullness, the profound rightness of it. A low groan escaped him, a sound of agonized pleasure, as he buried himself to the hilt. Christ, Elara, he breathed, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. You feel. He didn't finish. Words failed. He began to move, a slow, deep rhythm that stole the breath from her lungs. It wasn't frantic, though the urgency hummed beneath the surface. It was a claiming, a joining, a profound exploration. His hands roamed her body, mapping her curves, learning her responses, his touch alternating between reverence and possessive hunger. He kissed her deeply, then trailed his lips along her jaw, down her neck, whispering words against her skin, not declarations of love, but raw, visceral appreciations. So beautiful, your skin, like silk, the way you feel around me. She met his rhythm, her hips lifting, her legs wrapping around him, pulling him deeper. Every thrust, every shift, sent waves of pleasure crashing through her, building a tension so exquisite, it bordered on pain. She raked her nails lightly down his back, earning a sharp intake of breath, and a deeper, more forceful thrust that made her cry out. Her world narrowed to the point where their bodies joined, to the friction, the heat, the overwhelming sensation of being utterly filled, possessed and cherished, all at once. The sterile room filled with the sounds of their ragged breathing, the slick slide of skin on skin, the soft, involuntary sounds of pleasure escaping them both. He shifted, lifting her hips slightly, changing the angle. The new pressure was electric, igniting a coil of white-hot heat deep within her. There, she gasped, her eyes flying open, meeting his intense gaze. Leo, there. I know, he murmured, his voice thick with satisfaction. He held the angle, driving into her with relentless precision, each thrust hitting that perfect spot, sending shockwaves through her core. The coil tightened unbearably. She clung to him, her fingers digging into the hard muscles of his shoulders, her cries becoming sharper, more desperate. The world dissolved into pure sensation, the feel of him inside her, the grip of his hands on her hips, the rough sound of his breathing in her ear, the overwhelming scent of rain, sex, and him. Let go, he urged, his voice a ragged whisper against her ear. Elara, let go for me. His command, the raw need in his voice, shattered the last vestige of her control. The coil snapped. Pleasure exploded through her, a supernova detonating in her core, radiating outwards in blinding, shattering waves. She arched off the floor, a wordless cry tearing from her throat, her body convulsing around his, clutching him in a vice of ecstasy. Feeling her climax, hearing her cry, seeing the abandon on her face, pushed him over the edge. He buried his face in the curve of her neck with a guttural groan, his body locking, shuddering violently as his own release ripped through him, hot and deep. He held her impossibly tight, his arms like steel bands, as if anchoring himself to her as the waves crashed over him. They collapsed together, spent, gasping, slick with sweat and rain, limbs entangled on the cool stone floor. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the relentless drumming of the rain outside. Leo shifted slightly, rolling to his side, pulling her with him, cradling her against his chest. Her head rested on his shoulder, her ear pressed against the frantic, slowing beat of his heart. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close, his chin resting on the top of her head. The silence that descended wasn't empty or awkward. It was profound, thick with shared intimacy and the aftershocks of seismic pleasure. He traced idle patterns on the smooth skin of her back with a calloused fingertip. So, he murmured, his voice rough but laced with a deep contentment. Negotiating with wisteria seems positively tame now. A surprised, breathless laugh bubbled up from Elara. She tilted her head back to look at him. His face was relaxed, softer than she'd ever seen it, a faint, satisfied smile playing on his lips. The storm-gray eyes held a warmth, a peace that made her heart constrict. I believe, she managed, her voice husky. We just redefined boundary issues, Mr. Finch. His smile widened into a genuine grin, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Call me Leo, he said softly, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. After that, I think we're well past formalities. Leo, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt intimate, right? She nestled closer, the hard floor forgotten, the cool air ignored. Wrapped in his warmth, his strength, the scent of his skin filling her senses, Elara felt a peace she hadn't known existed. The fire hadn't destroyed her, it had forged her anew. The concrete had cracked, and something vibrant, wild, and breathtakingly beautiful had pushed through. The days that followed were a golden haze, a secret world existing within the glass walls of the Eyrie. The merger negotiations continued, demanding Elara's formidable intellect during the day, but her focus was irrevocably altered. Her office, once a sterile command center, now held the phantom scent of Leo, earth and sunshine, and something uniquely male. The terrace was no longer just a viewing platform. It was the sacred ground where their silent dance had culminated in the rain. And the annex, the scene of their first joining, became their sanctuary. Their bond was forged in silence and touch, a language deeper than words. Mornings began tangled in her vast bed, the sheets smelling of sex and jasmine. He'd brought her a small blooming pot, placed on her nightstand. They communicated through lingering glances across the breakfast table. He'd started joining her, a quiet revolution Harrison observed with stoic discretion, through the brush of his hand against hers as he passed her coffee, through the way his eyes darkened when she entered a room. Flirtatious banter became their shared secret language, woven into the mundane. She found him one afternoon in the greenhouse he'd painstakingly restored. Sunlight streamed through the now clean glass, warming the air, filled with the humid scent of thriving plants and damp earth. He was repotting seedlings, his movements economical, focused. She leaned against the doorframe, watching the play of muscle in his bare back, the concentration on his profile. Planning a hostile takeover of the orchid population. "Leo?" she inquired, a smile playing on her lips. He didn't look up, but a smile touched his own. "Just ensuring adequate living space, Elara. These little guys need room to stretch their roots." He patted the soil firmly around a tiny green shoot. "Crowding stifles growth, leads to complications." She stepped inside, the warm, fragrant air enveloping her. Complications, like competing for resources, aggressive root systems, thrive. His gaze held hers, the double meaning clear and delicious. She moved closer, reaching out to touch a velvety leaf of a nearby African violet. "Some roots," she murmured, tracing the edge, "seem to thrive on entanglement." She looked at him pointedly. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands settled on her waist, pulling her gently against him. "Entanglement," he repeated, his voice dropping to a low rumble, "has its definite advantages." He dipped his head, his lips brushing the sensitive spot just below her ear. Deep penetration, mutual support. His teeth grazed her earlobe gently. Explosive growth. Heat flooded her cheeks and pooled low in her belly. She swatted playfully at his chest. "You're impossible." "And you," he countered, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers up her arm, "are incredibly distracting." "I was trying to be productive." She arched an eyebrow. "Productive? I seem to recall you achieving significant growth earlier this morning." He laughed, the sound warm and rich, filling the greenhouse. He pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a slow, lingering kiss that tasted of sunshine and earth and promise. "Point taken," he murmured against her mouth. "Productivity is overrated." Their love reshaped the very air of the Eyrie. Elara walked barefoot on dew-damp grass at dawn, something the old Elara would have deemed unthinkably messy. She lingered over meals. She laughed, a sound that startled her at first, then became more frequent, freer. The gardens flourished under Leo's hands with an almost supernatural vibrancy. Roses bloomed in profusion, their heady scent drifting through open windows. Wisteria cascaded in lavender waterfalls over the restored pergola near the terrace. The wilderness was tamed, not into submission, but into a breathtaking living tapestry of color and scent, a reflection of the wild, beautiful thing blooming between them. Leo, too, transformed. The quiet stillness remained, but it was warmed by a new ease, a contentment that softened the lines around his eyes. He smiled more readily, a genuine, open expression that transformed his face. Yet, Elara sensed shadows sometimes. A distant look in his eyes when a certain news report about European royalty flickered on a screen. A slight tension in his shoulders when a formal letter arrived for him, bearing an unfamiliar heavy paper and a seal he quickly tucked away. He'd offer a vague explanation, family business, and change the subject with a kiss or a distracting touch. She didn't press. His past was a locked door, and for now, basking in the radiant present, she was content to leave it closed. The man he was with her, gentle, strong, fiercely present, was enough. One evening, walking through the moonlit gardens, the scent of night-blooming jasmine thick in the air, he stopped near the old stone fountain he'd resurrected. Water trickled softly. He turned to her, his face silvered in the moonlight, his expression serious. "It's beautiful," she murmured, leaning into his side, his arm draped around her shoulders. "What you've done here, it had the potential," he said quietly, his gaze sweeping over the transformed landscape. "Just needed someone to see it, to believe it could be more than weeds." He looked down at her, his eyes dark pools in the night. "Like you, Elara." Her breath caught. "Me. I saw the wildflowers pushing through the cracks, the potential for this." He gestured between them, then at the garden. It just needed the right conditions. A little rain, a little reckless faith. Reckless, she challenged softly, though her heart swelled. He smiled, a slow, intimate curve of his lips. Terrifyingly reckless, he agreed, pulling her closer. And the most necessary thing I've ever done. He kissed her then, under the moon and the stars, surrounded by the life they had coaxed into being together. The kiss was a promise, a silent vow in the fragrant darkness. Their intimacy deepened, moving beyond the initial frantic hunger into something richer, more profound. It was in the quiet moments, him bandaging a tiny cut on her finger after she'd impulsively tried to help him prune roses, earning a gentle admonishment and a lingering kiss on the injured fingertip, her finding him asleep on the sun-warmed grass near the greenhouse, a book fallen open on his chest, his face relaxed in peaceful slumber, the shared silence as they watched the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues from the terrace, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. One afternoon, a sudden fierce summer storm rolled in, darkening the sky, lashing the windows with rain. Elara, caught in her office reviewing a particularly contentious clause in the merger agreement, felt the familiar tension coiling in her shoulders. The arguments on the screen blurred. Frustration simmered. She pushed back from her desk, needing air, needing escape. She found Leo not in the garden, but in the annex, now subtly transformed. He'd brought in a deep, comfortable armchair and a small side table. A single jasmine bloom floated in a shallow bowl. He was reading, the soft light of a floor lamp illuminating his face. He looked up as she entered, sensing her tension immediately. He closed his book, setting it aside. "Boardroom barbarians proving particularly savage today?" he asked, his voice calm, a steady anchor in the storm. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Just the usual territorial pissing contest," she muttered, pacing the small space. "They want concessions that would gut the core value." Arrogant, short-sighted, he stood, intercepting her path. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He simply pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She rested her forehead against his chest, breathing in his familiar, calming scent. His hands rubbed slow circles on her back. The tension in her shoulders began to melt under his touch, replaced by a warm, spreading sense of peace. The angry words on the screen, the pounding rain outside, receded. "Sometimes," he murmured against her hair, his voice a low vibration against her skin, "you have to prune back the deadwood, even if it screams." His hands slid lower, settling possessively on her hips. "Make space for what really matters, what really grows." The storm raged outside, but in his eyes, she saw only calm certainty, a reflection of the sanctuary they'd built together. The frustration evaporated, replaced by a different kind of heat. She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. "Pruning sounds decisive," she murmured, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Aggressive, even." His hands tightened on her hips, pulling her flush against him. "Requires firm hands, clear vision." He bent his head, his lips brushing hers. Thorough execution. The kiss that followed was slow, deep, and utterly consuming. It wasn't about chasing climax, but about connection, reassurance, the reaffirmation of their bond. He walked her backwards until her legs hit the armchair. He sank into it, pulling her down onto his lap, straddling him. They kissed as the storm lashed the windows, a world away. His hands explored her body through the silk of her blouse, with unhurried reverence, learning her anew. She rocked against him, feeling his arousal hard against her core, a delicious friction even through their clothes. "Leo," she breathed, breaking the kiss, resting her forehead against his. "Elara," he responded, his voice thick with desire. His hands found the buttons of her blouse. She laughed softly, the sound swallowed by his kiss, as his hands pushed the silk aside, as his mouth found her breast, as she arched against him, lost in the slow building rhythm they created together. Elara knew. This was more than passion. This was transformation. This was home. The controlled CEO had been reshaped, reborn in the crucible of forbidden desire, forged in the silent, all-consuming fire of Leo's love. The gardener had tended her neglected heart, and something breathtakingly wild and beautiful had bloomed. The bond was absolute, silent, and unbreakable. They were each other's sanctuary, each other's truth. And in that quiet annex, as the summer storm raged outside, they nurtured the flame.
Chapter 4. The golden haze of their secret world couldn't last. Reality, like the persistent weeds Leo battled in the forgotten corners of the estate, pushed through the cracks of their sanctuary. The transformation of the area's grounds was too visible, too vibrant a testament to the gardener's presence and skill, and Elara Vance, the famously controlled, fiercely private CEO, was different, softer, seen smiling absently out of windows, walking the gardens at dawn, her sharp heels abandoned for the cool kiss of dewgrass on bare soles. Laughter, low and genuine, sometimes drifted from the open terrace doors. Whispers started, first among the discreet household staff, exchanged glances when Leo entered the main kitchen for coffee without summons, a nod from Harrison that held a new unspoken understanding. Then, rippling outwards, associates visiting for tense merger meetings noticed the startling bloom where sterility had reigned, the subtle shift in Elara's aura, less ice queen, more woman, grounded in something unseen but potent, and they noticed the quiet, strikingly handsome gardener who moved through the vibrant landscape with an air of belonging that transcended employment. Elara felt the scrutiny like a sudden chill wind. Walking through the newly fragrant rose garden with Leo one afternoon, his hand a warm, casual presence on the small of her back, she caught the averted gaze of her head of legal, Celia, observing them from the terrace. Celia's expression wasn't hostile, just assessing, calculating. "They see us," Elara murmured, the warmth of the sun suddenly less comforting. Leo followed her gaze. His hand didn't move. "Let them see," he said, his voice calm, steady. He plucked a deep crimson rose, its petals velvety soft, its scent heady and rich. He carefully removed the thorns from the stem with his calloused thumb. "The roses aren't hiding. Why should we?" He tucked the bloom gently behind her ear, his fingers lingering for a heartbeat against her temple. "Besides," he added, a familiar glint of challenge in his grey eyes, "I doubt the formidable Miss Vance is intimidated by a few curious glances. Or is the boardroom titan afraid of a little garden gossip?" She arched an eyebrow, the old defense mechanism kicking in, but softened by the touch of the rose and the warmth in his gaze. "Gossip is manageable, Mr. Finch," she countered, deliberately using the formal address, a playful spark in her dark eyes. "It's the potential for tedious boardroom speculation about my distractions that grates. They might suggest I'm neglecting my thornier duties for fragrant pursuits." Leo chuckled, the sound warm and low. He leaned closer, his breath a whisper against her cheekbone. "Fragrant pursuits have their merits, Miss Vance," he murmured, his gaze dropping pointedly to her lips. "Highly stimulating. Improves focus, I find." He straightened, his expression turning mock serious. "But if neglect is the concern, perhaps I should demonstrate my commitment to your other assets. That overgrown hedge near the east wall looks like it needs some aggressive attention. I could be very thorough." The double entendre hung in the fragrant air, deliberate and delicious. Heat bloomed in Elara's cheeks, a familiar welcome warmth. "Thoroughness is always appreciated, Mr. Finch," she replied, her voice husky, "especially when dealing with persistent problems." She turned, walking towards the terrace, feeling his gaze like a physical caress on her back. The banter, their secret language woven with thorns and blooms, was a shield and a lifeline. But the chill of the outside world's gaze lingered. The pressure intensified subtly. A veiled question about staff morale during a shareholder call. A society blog post, easily dismissed but pointed, musing about Vance Industries' CEO and her mysterious landscape artist. Harrison reported a discreet increase in paparazzi drones skirting the perimeter security. Elara's meticulously controlled public image was developing cracks, filled with the vibrant, inconvenient colors of her private life. And Leo remained an enigma. He brushed off the growing scrutiny with calm indifference, focusing on the garden, on her. Yet Elara sensed the shadows deepen behind his eyes. He became slightly more withdrawn after receiving a heavy, cream-colored envelope bearing an unfamiliar, elegant script and a wax seal he swiftly pocketed. When she'd asked, a rare tension tightened his jaw. "Just tedious family obligations, Elara," he'd said, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair. "Nothing that concerns us, not here." His kiss had been fierce, possessive, an attempt to banish the ghosts. She'd allowed it, soothed by his touch, but the seed of doubt, tiny and sharp, had been planted. The breaking point arrived on a day saturated with the scent of Leo's triumph, the first blooms on the ancient wisteria he'd battled. Lavender cascades dripped from the restored pergola near the terrace, filling the air with their sweet, intoxicating perfume. Elara was reviewing final merger documents in her office, the terms finally favorable, a hard-won victory that should have tasted sweet. Instead, it felt like ash. The strain of the dual existence, the ruthless CEO and the woman aflame with forbidden love, was fraying her nerves. A commotion near the front gates, amplified by the security feed Harrison discreetly patched through to her screen, shattered the fragile peace. Not the usual paparazzi drones, black sedans with mirrored windows, men in impeccably tailored dark suits that screamed not security, moved with unnerving purpose, speaking to Harrison at the gate intercom. Their bearing was rigid, formal, radiating an authority that even Harrison's usual stoic demeanor seemed to buckle under. Elara's blood ran cold. She knew power. She commanded it.
This was different. This was old power, sovereign power. Her gaze flew to the garden. Leo was visible near the greenhouse, his back turned, tending to orchids. Oblivious, or was he? She stood, her legs unsteady, a cold dread, deeper than any boardroom threat, coiled in her stomach. The carefully constructed walls of their secret world trembled. She moved towards the terrace doors, needing air, needing to see him, to anchor herself before the storm hit. She stepped onto the terrace, just as Harrison, his face pale and grim, emerged from the main entrance below, followed by two of the dark-suited men. They moved with efficient grace towards the greenhouse. Leo straightened as they approached, wiping his hands on a rag. Elara watched, frozen, from the terrace above, the scent of wisteria suddenly cloying. She couldn't hear the words, only saw the tableau. Harrison spoke, gesturing towards the men. Leo listened, his posture shifting subtly. The easy grace of the gardener solidified into something else, an innate, unyielding posture of command. He didn't hunch, he seemed to grow taller, his shoulders squaring, his chin lifting. The quiet stillness became regal bearing. He nodded once, curtly, his face unreadable from this distance. Then he turned and looked up, directly at her on the terrace. The distance couldn't hide the transformation. The warmth, the softness she knew, was gone, replaced by a stark, somber resolve in his storm-gray eyes. It was the look of a man facing an inescapable duty, the look he'd worn carrying her through fire, but colder, more final. He said something to Harrison, then turned and walked, not towards the house, but towards the secluded bench nestled beneath the blooming wisteria. He didn't look back at the waiting men, he looked only at her, a silent command to join him. Her legs carried her down the terrace steps, across the vibrant lawn, past the dark-suited men who stood like sentinels, their eyes carefully averted. The scent of wisteria was overwhelming now, sweet and suffocating. She reached the pergola. Leo stood by the bench, bathed in the dappled lavender light filtering through the blossoms. He wasn't the gardener, he wasn't even the lover. He was a stranger wearing Leo's face, radiating a quiet, devastating authority. "Elara," he said, his voice low, stripped of its usual warmth, carrying that faint, unplaceable accent she now recognized as distinctly European, not rough-edged, but refined. "We need to talk." He gestured to the bench. She didn't sit. She stood before him, her CEO mask slamming back into place, a defense against the terrifying vulnerability threatening to consume her. "Who are they?" she demanded, her voice colder than she intended, betraying the fear beneath. He flinched almost imperceptibly at her tone. He looked down at his hands, still bearing the faint stains of soil, then back at her face. The conflict in his eyes was agonizing. "They are from the royal household," he said, the words dropping like stones into the fragrant silence. "Of a Teethelgard." A Teethelgard, the name resonated dimly. A small, wealthy principality nestled in the Alps, known for its discretion, its old-world charm, its reclusive royal family. Shock, cold and absolute, washed over her. The pieces clicked with brutal clarity, the stillness that wasn't servility, the quiet confidence rooted in something deeper than earth, the unplaceable accent, the shadows when European news flickered, the heavy envelopes with seals. Royal household, the words felt alien on her tongue. "Leo, what are you saying?" He took a deep breath, his gaze steady on hers, bracing for impact. "My name," he said, each word deliberate, weighted, "is Prince Leopold Alexander von Ethelgard." The world tilted, the vibrant garden blurred, the scent of wisteria turned sickly sweet. Prince, the gardener who'd kissed her in the rain, who'd made love to her on the stone floor, whose calloused hands knew her body with intimate tenderness, was royalty. The anonymity he'd sought wasn't just escape, it was a gulf as wide as an ocean. The title felt like a blade twisting between them. He recoiled as if struck. "Don't," he rasped, the regal mask cracking, revealing raw pain. "Don't call me that. Not you, please." He reached out a hand, then let it fall. "I came here after my brother died. The air. There was pressure, expectations, grief I couldn't breathe through. I needed to disappear, to be no one, to work with my hands, to find quiet." His gaze swept over the garden he'd transformed, then back to her, filled with a desperate intensity. "To find this, to find you." The confession hung in the air. Elara understood the need to vanish, the crushing weight of expectation, but the lie of omission, the vastness of what he'd hidden, it felt like a betrayal. The foundation of their intimacy, built on perceived equality in their sanctuary, felt suddenly fragile, built on sand. "You lied to me," she stated, the hurt cutting through the shock. "I hid," he corrected, his voice strained. "To protect this, to protect us, to have this time, this realness, away from the crown, the cameras, the suffocating duty." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "Leo Finch is real, Elara. the man who loves you, who saved you, who tends this garden. That's who I am beneath the title. The prince, that's the disguise." He gestured towards the waiting men. "They found me. My father, the king, is ill. My presence is required. My exile is over." The finality of it slammed into her. Required. Over. The sanctuary was breached. Their secret garden was exposed. The world, with its judgments, its prejudices, a powerful black CEO and a white prince, its crushing protocols, was crashing in. The beautiful, impossible bubble had burst. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart felt like shattered glass. He looked at her, his eyes holding hers with a devastating mixture of love and sorrow. "I have to go back, briefly, to Elara, to face my responsibilities." He paused, the silence heavy with unspoken implications. "But I won't go alone, not if you'll come with me." He reached out again, slowly this time, his hand hovering near her cheek. "Or," his voice dropped, thick with emotion, "or I stay. I renounce it, all of it, for you, for this." He gestured around them, at the garden, at the life they'd built. The offer hung between them, immense and terrifying. Renounce a kingdom. For her, the weight of it was staggering. The selfish part of her, the woman ablaze with his love, screamed yes, stay. But the CEO, the strategist, saw the impossible cost, the scandal, the isolation for him, the relentless scrutiny for them both. He was a prince. His duty was woven into his DNA, just as control had once been woven into hers. Asking him to sever that would be to destroy a fundamental part of him, the part that possessed the quiet strength she loved. She looked past him, at the dark-suited emissaries of a world she didn't know, a world that would dissect their relationship under a microscope. She looked at the garden, the roses, the wisteria, the vibrant life he'd coaxed from neglect, their creation. Then she looked back at him, at Leo, not the prince but the man whose touch had transformed her, the man who saw the wildflowers pushing through her concrete. She took his hovering hand, not the hand of a prince, but the hand of her gardener, her rescuer, her love, calloused, strong, real. "You can't renounce who you are, Leo," she said softly, her voice thick with unshed tears but resolute. "Not even for this, not even for me. That crown, it's part of your roots. Pruning it out would kill something vital." She squeezed his hand, her thumb tracing a familiar callus. "And I wouldn't love the man who could do that." Relief and anguish warred in his eyes. "Elara, I won't hide," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "Not anymore. And I won't let you hide either. Not from this." She took a deep breath, drawing on the new power she'd discovered within herself, the power born of vulnerability, of love. "You go back to Athelgard, face your duties, your father." She met his gaze, her dark eyes blazing with a fierce certainty that mirrored his own strength. "And then you come back, to me, openly, as Prince Leopold, and we face the circus together."
A slow, determined smile touched her lips. "After all, I specialize in managing complex negotiations and hostile environments. And you," she added, her voice dropping to a familiar, intimate murmur, "excel at cultivating beauty in the most unexpected places. Between us, Your Highness, I think we can handle a few thorns." A choked sound, half laugh, half sob, escaped him. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him, burying his face in her hair. The scent of wisteria enveloped them. "God, Elara," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion, "you terrify me, and you are magnificent." He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she hadn't realized had fallen. "Are you sure?" The scrutiny, the ugliness. She leaned into his touch. "Let them stare," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Let them whisper. Our garden speaks louder." She glanced towards the waiting men, then back at him, a glint of their old banter sparking in her eyes. "Besides, think of the landscaping opportunities in Ethelgard. I hear the palace gardens are terribly formal. Could use some persistent wildflowers." He laughed, a real warm sound that banished the lingering shadows. He kissed her then, under the cascade of lavender blooms, a kiss that sealed their pact. It was a kiss of love, of defiance, of a shared future chosen freely amidst the ruins of secrecy. It tasted of wisteria, of tears, and of unshakable resolve. The departure was swift, formal, a jarring intrusion into their sanctuary. Leo, Prince Leopold, changed into clothes brought by the aides, dark, impeccably tailored trousers, a crisp white shirt that seemed alien on his sun-tanned frame. The transformation was complete. The gardener was gone, replaced by the prince. Yet, when he turned to her before stepping into the waiting car, his eyes held the same fierce tenderness, the same quiet strength she knew. He took her hand, not as a prince, but as her Leo, and pressed a kiss to her palm, a silent promise. Prune the boardroom barbarians ruthlessly, while I'm gone, he murmured, a final echo of their private language, his thumb tracing her knuckles, and save some wildness for me. Always, she whispered, squeezing his hand. Just hurry back, Your Highness. The wisteria needs aggressive attention, and I require a very thorough gardener. A ghost of his familiar, challenging smile touched his lips. Thoroughness, he promised, his gaze holding hers, is guaranteed. He released her hand, his expression shifting to one of regal composure as he slid into the car. The door closed with a soft final click. The black sedans glided away. Silence descended, heavy and profound. Elara stood alone on the drive, the scent of exhaust momentarily overwhelming the wisteria. The vibrant garden suddenly felt too large, too quiet. The airy, once a sterile fortress, now felt like an empty stage. But the emptiness didn't last. It was filled by a quiet, fierce determination. She wasn't the woman who'd been rescued from the fire. She wasn't the CEO who'd built walls. She was Elara Vance, transformed by love, forged in its fire. She had fought for empires. She would fight for this, for them. The world erupted, just as they'd known it would. The revelation was a global sensation. Prince in disguise, Athagard's Leopold found working as gardener for US CEO. Scandal or romance, black business magnate and reclusive prince. The photos were everywhere, grainy shots of Leo working in the gardens, clearer shots of Elara at Gallus, spliced together with the official stern portrait released by the Aethagard Palace. The speculation was relentless, intrusive, often ugly, dissecting their race, their class difference, the impropriety. Elara faced it with the steely grace she'd honed in boardrooms, but infused with a new grounded power. She gave one interview, carefully controlled, not about the prince, but about the man, about courage, about finding unexpected beauty, about the transformative power of connection that defies expectation. She spoke of the gardens he'd built, a metaphor that resonated. She didn't shy away. She claimed their story, reframing the narrative from scandal to a testament of human resilience and love. Her poise, her intelligence, her quiet dignity in the face of the storm began to shift the tide. Whispers of gold digger slowly gave way to murmurs of power couple. The image of the beautiful black CEO, unapologetic and strong, standing beside the prince who'd chosen authenticity, began to capture imaginations. Weeks passed. Communication was guarded, encrypted messages filled with longing and shared resolve. He was navigating the treacherous waters of the palace, his father's illness, the weight of his return duty, but his messages always ended the same: hold our ground, tend our garden, I am coming home to you. Then, one rain-swept afternoon mirroring the day their resolve had shattered, a single, powerful motorcycle roared up the drive, bypassing the main gate security Harrison had been warned to expect. It stopped before the terrace. The rider dismounted, pulling off his helmet. Rain plastered his hair dark to his head, streamed down his face. He wore black riding leathers, not palace finery. But the eyes that found hers through the downpour were unmistakable. Leo's eyes, filled with love, exhaustion, and fierce triumphant joy. Elara stood on the terrace, not in CEO attire, but in soft linen trousers and a simple sweater, her feet bare. She didn't wait. She ran down the steps, into the rain, straight into his open arms. He caught her, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around as the rain soaked them both, his laughter mingling with hers, a wild, free sound. "You're late," she gasped against his wet neck, clinging to him. The roses were getting unruly, started questioning my authority. He set her down, his hands framing her face, his gaze drinking her in. "Had to prune some particularly stubborn deadwood at the palace," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Negotiations were complex, required firm hands and a clear vision. His thumb brushed her rain-slicked cheek. "But I promised thoroughness, and I always keep my promises, Miss Vance." He kissed her then, in the pouring rain, as he had months before. A kiss of homecoming, of victory, of a bond that had weathered the storm. It tasted of rain, of tears, and of a future blooming wild and free, forever intertwined. Behind them, the Eyrie stood, no longer a sterile fortress, but a vibrant testament to love's transformative power. The gardens Leo had coaxed from neglect flourished wildly, a riot of color and scent against the gray rain, their silent, beautiful declaration. The controlled woman and the prince in disguise had shattered their old worlds and built a new one. Together, from the ashes and the blooms, the slow burn had forged a phoenix, and their flight had just begun.